Welcome back to the Profit School podcast. This is the AI first edition where a couple of business partners, myself, Chris Mercer, and of course, my business partner, Jeff Sauer, are talking all about how we are using AI first with our company, Profit School, as well as Measure You. So we're going to talk today about automation and specifically this concept of automation first and the pros and cons of that and sort of our experience so far is what it's been like. It's early days for everybody. So Mr. Sauer, when you're thinking about automation first, what do you think about?
So it's interesting. I've always been anti-automation, believe it or not. And even when you brought up automation to me, I was like, yeah, that sounds crazy because I always thought that automation would fail if you didn't have a human in the loop, if you didn't have some kind of human person there. And I would just question how much you could really automate because I've seen a lot of people. I look at automation as just like digital noise and spam because usually what ends up happening is people are automating the pulling of email addresses off, scraping internet email addresses, and then
like
mailing
those cold
people out.
email things that people do.
Yeah. And I just got said, yeah, exactly. Like automation to me is creating a lot of noise without a lot of value because there was no human in the loop. And so that was just like, do I really want to be an automation first company or do I want to be a high value? Do I want to be more boutique? Do I want to be, sacrifice that growth just to be a better steward of what's going on? And so I looked at it mostly from a con perspective, Mercer, but I'm coming around to the pros a lot lately. Some of it's from influence from you. Some of it's from influence from our team members like Manisha. Some of it's just from realizing that my perception was probably wrong in the first place. Is that automation does not mean full 100% automation. It means that there is humans in the loop. So I want to hand it back to you and just think about it. But I was like not possible. Now I'm like impossible not to do.
Now you're like, where else can we automate? Yeah,
exactly.
It's a really good point because I agree with you. It's like automation itself is not a bad thing. Just like a hammer is not a bad thing. You can use a hammer to build a house or put a bunch of walls, a bunch of holes in the walls of the house, right? So it's what you automate and how you're thinking about automation, is kind of what you're talking about, right? It's like how you're switching that around. And for me, I think about automation in terms of what are the processes, and I really try to make it like simple copy and paste stuff, right? Where it's like, what's the process that we do repetitively over and over? That's predictable, that's mechanical, and if we can figure out how to get the human out of that, doing the actual activity part of it, but the human is still there to make sure the result is there, right? The purpose of the automation. Did it produce that thing that they were trying to do? Like I said, copy and pasting is an automation, right? But why would you manually have to do that if you can get something to automate to do that? Pulling transcripts from a video could be copy and paste, right? You log into the thing and you download your transcripts. Well, you can automate stuff like that, right? But that's the things I think that people miss when it comes to automation is thinking about that. But you have to have a defined process. And that's where I think that the pros and cons come in a little bit. Like to your point, I think initially when you were thinking about automation, you were thinking about stuff that really wasn't process driven. It was automating a result. So, I want to automate my cold outreach, but that's the end result of a process that actually gets automated. The process is what gets automated, not the result. The result is just a symptom of the automation, type of thing. So for me, I guess just kind of getting the pros and cons a little bit too, we can move into that. It's thinking through when you're going to automate, where does it not work? It's typically when you're trying to automate a result and you haven't really thought through the process, you don't really have a process to automate, or there's a lot more squishiness in the process where there is that human who's like, well, it depends. Depends on what? Depends on 3 things, on 40 things. Like that's really hard to automate if you have a process like that. But if you have a very simple process, super easy to automate and has lots of pros. So we can kind of dive in from that perspective if you want.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I mean, you said it, like prove it first, prove it manually, do these things a few times. That is my biggest problem with automation is that people are automating things too early or when it's not something that you should automate or they're not proven at it.
Or they're buying somebody else's automations too. That happens a lot with all the tool companies that are coming out, right? That'll be around for a year and then not around anymore. This, like, we promise to do it for you. We'll automate this whole thing. We know what you need. And, don't get me wrong. I know that there are some products like that are useful, but a lot of them are just, they're not really automating your process. They're giving you a process that you snap on to your organization, and it may or may not represent your brand, right?
Yeah.
And it can hurt you.
Well, like you said, like if you've never done cold outreach before, why would you want to send it to 1,000 people
Yeah.
when you got to when you got to get 3 people to actually respond doing it
Yeah.
manually? I would rather have you do that. Then you actually are automating something that scales. Like
Yeah.
people are so focused on scale, but all the companies that have scaled, they always say do things that don't scale. That's like the
Yeah.
Patrick Collison from Stripe has that famous talk. If you just do things that don't scale on YouTube, it's incredible. There's something by Paul Graham from Y Combinator that mentions that as well. I wrote something, Mercer, back in 2008. I wrote a blog article called "It's Never Too Late to Automate, but Sometimes It's Too Soon." And
Yeah, I love that. That's
yeah,
exactly right. I love that. That's
so
exactly right.
yeah, so over
Yeah.
15 years ago, I wrote that. And then funny thing is, Avinash Kaushik, who was like my god in analytics, he commented on. He goes, "You're so right, Jeff." And I was like, "Holy cow!" Avinash read my article, and he whatever. But yeah,
That's
never too
cool.
late to automate, but sometimes it's too soon. That's just how I feel about it. Now, the thing we talked about pros and cons. Pros are that once you come around, the con is that you do it too early.
Hmm.
The pro is that you save time, you save effort, you save everything. You make it more consistent, you make it better, and you are able to go do new things. And so we're very much in the pro side of automation now. And to me, the reason why is because we have a strategy for automation now, not just automation for scale. It's not like, it's like basically scale is an end result, but that's the last step, not the first step. So we have a 9-part automation framework. I don't know if we have time on this episode to go through it all, but I do want to talk a little bit about the
Hmm.
3 different phases that will make automation successful for you from a strategic perspective, and then we can see where this leads. How's that sound,
That
Mercer?
sounds perfect. Let's dive in.
All right, cool. So we are talking about strategy. So let's just call it like the goal is to go from a slow and inefficient business to a AI first business or an automated business that works really well. And there's 3 different phases that you go. First one is strategic planning. There's 3 steps in there. You need your result, your business process, and you need to decide if it's feasible or not. So before you go into N8N or Zapier or Make or write code or set up automations and do things, you need to at least answer those 3 questions. Okay. And those are all planning steps, strategic steps. Does this even make sense? Am I saving more time than effort in doing this thing? And can it be done with automation technology? That's another thing is sometimes you want to automate something, but it's not there yet, or it's way more work to automate it than it is to not do it. So you go through that in your strategic planning phase. And now you know if this is a strategic initiative or not. Can I get that result through automation? Now, I bet you right now that probably 9 out of 10 things can be automated with the state of technology as it is now. Like a year or 2 ago, maybe like 5 out of 10. So like we've come around. There's a lot more endpoints and APIs. There's a lot more things we can do with that. But the reality is that if you don't do that feasibility analysis, you're going to probably work on the wrong thing and get the wrong result, right? So strategic planning is really important, and I want to leave it at that for now. We'll talk about the other steps in a minute here, but just from a planning perspective, I would say that most failed projects will fail in that first 3 steps because you knew that the plan wasn't there and that it wasn't going to be possible. And so you saved yourself a lot of those burnt cycles and a lot of that pain. Would you agree with that? That
Hmm.
by doing it, by knowing your desired result, the business process you're doing right now, your proven process, or at least pretty far along to proven process, and then a feasibility analysis, can this be automated? Would that solve most of the pains of people just having automations that don't work?
Yeah, most people aren't good at defining the result. They define an outcome. They define what they a vision for what they want it to one
Mm-hmm.
day be, but it's not a result. In order to define the result, you have to be able to know the process. You have to have the recipe. So it's like, how do you define a cake? Oh, a cake is made because it's flour and water and salt and sugar and heat and mixing in these certain ingredients for a certain period of time. That is cake. That's so we know the process for cake, how to get a cake, and what a cake looks like at the end of that process. And that's what makes a killer automation, is having both sides. Most people think I've defined the result, but they just have that wish of what they want it to be in the end, but they don't have the process for how to get there, so you can't automate. Right. And that becomes just a cluster, because the problem is you don't know you can't automate. So you try to automate it. But what you're actually doing is trying to figure out the process as you're trying to automate the process at the same time. And that's why you end up getting frustrated and, having to rip a bunch of stuff out, or you get 95% of the way there and realize you made a wrong turn at step 3 and have to start all over again. And it's because of that lack of planning. So that's why that is so important, because it's much easier to plan it out on paper, right, or on a flow chart or something, or a whiteboard, than it is to do it in Zapier and then realize you got to rip out a bunch of zaps and then rebuild it a whole different way in N8N or whatever the tool is that we're trying to use.
Yeah, I love that, and that's yeah. I was raised my hand and said I'm guilty because I'm still getting better at results versus just the how to. And you do a good job of reinforcing this. You're like, why are you thinking about how steps? We're not at the how steps right now. Those are how
Yeah.
steps, and that's a really big one because it's like the whole who not how Dan Sullivan book. It's like, are you thinking about how to do it? Because that's not your job. Your job is to define what the result is, which is much more strategic. It's much more binary than it is the how steps. Stop thinking about how you're going to do it because basically you're leading the system to based on your knowledge, not based on what's possible in the world. So I agree with you on that 100%.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it doesn't have to be complicated to do that because you can move into like, just explain the process of what's going on. You make a little flow chart or you draw it on a whiteboard. Our first, the human does this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And you write it out in your regular terminology. Like, don't try to make it like, oh, I'm going to have to do a Zapier step to do, like, you're not thinking about that part of it, the technical part of it. You just think about the business part of it, the flow part of it. And that's the two parts to know. Once you have that, the technical part can be built out of that other business process, but you still have the process nailed down. That's the important part.
Yep. Yeah. So the next step is implement and build, which is funny because like I'm looking at these steps, and this is actually what service stacking is too. It's like start with a strategy, sell implementation, and then sell the final step, which is maintenance, retainer, more things, more work. So that the funny thing is this is not just the how would you automate something. This is how would you sell automation. This is the steps. This is the process. This is pretty much everything. So basically this framework is inside of ProfitSchool. So just a little plug there, join our community and you'll learn, and you'll see even trainings about this, and you'll see this inside of the ProfitSchool community. So that's just a little thing there. If you're not in the ProfitSchool community right now, go do it so you can see this visual. I know it's really hard to see because we don't have it programmed in there. But next one, implement and build, which is 3 steps. Okay. So there's the technical blueprint, which is taking your business process, which is just like boxes of what systems you're using, and then putting the technical pieces behind it. Like, is there an API for this thing? What are the endpoints? What do we need this thing to do? So it's just putting a little bit more technical details behind what you're doing. This is something that generally, if you're the business person who wants to have something automated, this would be where your automation people come in. This is where your technical people come in, and they get that in place. And they might spend a couple hours doing that blueprint, but when they do that, that makes the next step take 10 minutes, and that is your build. Build is when you actually go into these tools and you build it out. So you're in N8N, you're in Zapier, you're in make.com. Now you know which tool to choose, whether it's Zapier, Make, or N8N, because of your technical blueprint and your feasibility analysis. You already knew that that's the place to go because that has the functionality. That's why you chose that tool, as opposed to trying to build it in N8N and realizing that doesn't work. Oh, I'm going to go to Zapier and see if that works. Yeah. And this is the crazy thing. This is step 5 in automation, is to build it out. Do you know any people start as that as being step 1? Most people who fail.
That's exactly right. That's how you learn. Yeah.
They start in the middle. That is literally dead center in the middle of this framework is the part that everybody starts on. So that's why you're failing. That's why you're automating too soon. That's why you're doing every one of these things. That's why that's why your cold outreach isn't scaling, because you're focused on step 9 of scale and step 5 of build, and you're missing everything else. Another important step, number 6, which is sort of unsung, is validate. You got to validate your build, and that's before you put it out to the world. You got to test it. Now, we go through this a lot, and guess what? Our validation, it breaks all the time. Even automation experts, they break things 10, 20 times before they can even get it into the real world, right? But that's fine. That's the whole point. You need to build, break until you validate that this thing is working, and then you basically have finished your implementation, and this thing is implemented. Now, it doesn't mean that it's in the real world yet, but it has, it's going to be there pretty soon. Any thoughts on that implementation and build piece?
Yeah, just to emphasize the point that you have to have a process first, and that's why people fail, is because they're trying to build it without a process. They haven't really thought it through at the level of detail that they realize they really need to think it through at, and that's the hardest part about this, is just forcing. And it's not hard, like effort wise. It's just hard to slow yourself down and be like, let me think this through. What do I do? Then I do this, then I do this, then I do this. But and that could be like 15 minutes. It just feels like it's super slow. It's really not. It's just, you got to jot that down. Then to your point, your build, because of that technical blueprint, right? The people that actually understand the tools. And if that's you, awesome, you can do that. But if it's somebody else in your team, they do that, or a vendor or somebody does that. But because you gave them a process, they can do it. They're more likely to create a technical blueprint that's really robust and useful, so that, like you said, at the build, it's just assembling pieces now. And that's what people think is like, well, how am I going to do this? It's that you shouldn't have to think about the how by the time you're assembling the pieces. You already know the how because you see your blueprint. You have your technical blueprint based off all of that. You know it's something you should automate. Now you're just putting pieces together. And that's so much easier. So
Yeah.
and if it's not that easy, it is because you skipped parts of the process and you just didn't realize it, which is fine. Because now it's like, okay, I thought it was good enough to get going. Turns out it wasn't. Now we've learned. Let's just define the process a little bit better, and you fix it.
This is why I quit football, Mercer, because you had to practice 14 days during the off season in order to get to one game, and then you'd play like 5 minutes in the game, and then you'd like, really? Now I have to go practice 6 more times.
I got to go run around the track again. Yeah.
I hated football because of this. Like this is really some people it makes sense for them, but I was like, man, a lot of practice, right? But funny thing is about practice is you get better at it, you get into shape, and it becomes easier. The first time you do it, it's hard because you have to have structure. And structure is something that a lot of people like me reject, entrepreneurs can reject, but they realize how important it is. It's just that they don't necessarily, it's not easy.
It's structure on their terms sometimes,
yeah,
exactly. Is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So the resistance is there for sure, but it's like you got to fight through that resistance in order to get the good stuff. And so as you were saying, the build is fun, and you get that muscle built up, and it can be beneficial to get to that point. And you had a really good point there, is that if you can do the business process and document it and your technical blueprint, you'll realize that endpoints can be reused. So it's almost like object-oriented programming or something where you can use this stuff over and over again. So your blueprint becomes reusable. If say that like a lot of the automations I'm doing are taking meeting recordings or courses that I teach and turning them into social media posts like on LinkedIn. Yep. Well, social media posts on LinkedIn is a module that we can plug into anything. So once we've solved that, we can solve that whether the content is X, Y, or Z, we can solve that. The other thing is downloading videos from Zoom and from Google Meet, which we solved, and then having an intermediary processing layer to turn it into social posts. So those are 2 different building blocks that can be used for everything. It can be used for a course, a meeting. It could be used for you on client calls. It could be your discovery calls. All that stuff can be one thing. And then the engine of turning it into something usable can be there too. All your meeting notes, all that stuff can be automated in like no time and put to wherever you want it to be. You don't need all these little AI note takers. You have it working for you automatically based on interchangeable parts. And that's amazing. And that's a big pro, I would say, of automation first, is these interchangeable parts you can use, the different endpoints. Once you figure it out once, you can use it over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the final thing is getting it out in the wild. Okay. So you have launch and maintain. Maintain's an important thing because these things do break. And they will break because you're at the will of the API of LinkedIn or the API of whatever your endpoint is or your beginning point, your starting point. And so you need to do that. So you need to make sure that it's there. So we have 3 steps here. We have observe. Observe is how is it behaving? Is it on the intended behavior? Is it matching our process? Is it at the same quality? Is it matching the blueprint? Is it still validated? Improve. This is human in the loop, of course. Like the human's like, hey, how do we improve this thing? Like getting feedback. In our last episode, we just talked about things like use the system to improve the system and getting in trust but verify. Can people trust but verify your automation to make it happen? And the final step is to scale, which is ultimately what we all want. That is what we think the end result is. Mm-hmm. Scale is actually a really hard thing to pin down and to define. Ultimately, anything is scaling. Using a computer is scaling. But the reality is that scale means that it's at scale where it's at production, and it's something you don't have to really worry about as much, and it's fully giving you that promise of time savings. It's really not until that last step that you realize all the benefits of automation, which for a few things. One is why you give up halfway through, because you started at the middle step and you never made it past that. That's why it's not worth it for you to automate, because you're not actually saving time. You're burning cycles. You're throwing good time at bad. Scale is ultimately so that is the end game that you're looking for, but it's not necessarily a result because that's hard to define. It's really just moving you forward. So that's the framework, Mercer. I want to hand it over to you to talk some more about this stuff because I know you got some good thoughts on this idea.
Yeah, the thing it's just kind of helping people out with like the pros and cons of this stuff, things to watch out for, because the framework works really really well. Again, we're just and it's not rocket science. It's like you said, everything follows these same basic steps in life. You sort of think it through, you sort of do it, and then you know build it out and take whatever actions you need to actually do, and then you actually do the thing and see if it worked, right? And then you go back to your plan and then build it out, and then you do the thing, and it's just pretty simple process. The trick with automation is especially in the beginning, they don't have a process. The second thing is you have too complicated of a process and you're trying to automate. Like, for example, we had one that Manisha did for us, which, you know, we have Circle posts that are coming in. They have Vimeo videos. We needed to make sure that the Circle posts that have these courses in them have descriptions and bullet points and all of that stuff. So we could have had a human go through and copy out the video and get a transcription and then use AI to do it and then put it back in there, right? Or an instructor who knew their stuff to kind of to say, okay, well, here's what I did, and just sort of write it out. But what Manisha did is she did these automations. Now, part of her way of doing the automation is she realized when she was doing her process, okay, I'm going to have to download the Vimeo video and get a transcript from the video. Okay, well, that in itself, immediately, because she knows this, you know, she's really good at this automation stuff. Immediately, she went, that is an automation by itself. Just go into Vimeo, download it, and get this transcript, right? In this case, we use assembly.ai, I believe, for the tool that she's using for that. So it just pulls the transcript, but that's the automation. That's all it does. And this is what's important about what you had said earlier, which is you start to realize this is how you can scale things, because you're not scaling, oh, I have all these Circle posts and everything else that goes on. What you're scaling is the use of the fact that now you know how to get transcripts for a video. How else can you use that? Oh, we can use it for Google Meet. We can use it for Vimeo. We can use it for all the other videos that we're doing. We can use we can use this particular automation of getting these transcripts over and over and over and over and over again in lots of other automations. So other bigger automations can kick off, and it kind of works like, you know, what they talk about ChatGPT assistants and workflows and stringing them all together. You're automating automations. So you have one automation that sort of kicks off and says, well, the first thing I need to do is kick off the automation that says, go download a video and get the transcript. And then that automation, once it's done, then I'm going to kick off another automation that says, hey, AI, go through here and look for this description, blah, 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 because that's what that automation really does. Then there's another automation that maybe gets kicked off later that says, okay, now go post it in Circle. And that's the post in Circle automation that we use for other things. So you can have an automation of automations, which is where it should move to. But that's the most complicated your automation should ever be, is that where they're automating other automations. You're not creating an entire 70, and I see a lot of these. They look fun. They look impressive. And it's like, oh my God, it's eye candy, but it's way too complicated. And when you have 75 different pieces that are all separate, like imagine having to do the video Vimeo stuff with transcripts and making that a piece. We build out those specific steps in 28 different automations. We have to just copy and paste them over and over and over again. And then we have to change that process for whatever reason. Like you said, maybe Vimeo changes something and we have to access it over here instead of over here. Maybe we find there's a better transcription tool. Well, now I have to go back and change 28 different automations that all use that process. Or I just changed the one automation that said, here's how we do transcripts. So the whole point of this, like the thing that shortcut most of the pain that people go through with automations, is simple, simple, simple. Your process is probably other sub processes that are in there. And you break out your process to say, okay, I have to do video transcription. That in itself is a process. Just denote that. Oh, I have to post in Circle. I got to post on LinkedIn. That itself, it's a process to note that. Those are the things you automate first. Those simple little bricks, those little Lego bricks of automations. Then you can stitch them together and use other automation campaigns as sort of conductors, you know, that sort of say, okay, I'm going to play a little bit of this flute over here, and then I'm going to bring in the trumpets, and then I'm going to bring in the drums. And that's sort of how automation levels up, where it can scale and it's easy to maintain. Because again, you have to assume you're going to have to change this automation eventually through no fault of your own. It's because the vendors you're using or the things you're interacting with are going to change something, because we can never control those. And they absolutely will. This is normal. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens. So build your system to be able to expect it by automating those slow little Lego bricks first, and then you sort of chain in the rest of the automation directionally.
I like that. Yeah, complex is cool, but not sustainable. You know, going back to our last episode, that's an example of like out with the trash too. Yeah. Definitely. And so I just saw the most complex automation I've ever seen yesterday, and I was like, "How did you have a process behind this thing?" And they're like, "No, I just did it." Yeah. And I just kept on iterating on it. I was like, "All right, well, that's a one of one."
It's a one of one. It doesn't
It's a
scale.
unicorn.
That's exactly right. It doesn't. You can't copy and paste it for anything else. It's going to break 1,000 different ways over the course of the year, and they'll eventually not use it anymore because it's too much to maintain.
Yeah.
It's exactly, and that happens a lot. And again, it is eye candy because you look at it, you're like, oh, it looks super cool, and everybody loves it because it looks super cool. But it's like a mirage of effort.
Yeah, and it's not. Once it breaks, it'll be broken forever, is my guess.
Yeah,
because you don't really know where to.
Yeah, the more complex things are, the more pieces in the automation, the more likely they are to break. And that's why when you do automations of automations at a certain level, it's less likely to break because maybe that little automation breaks somewhere, but you can fix that pretty quickly.
And it still looks pretty cool.
And it looks awesome. It really does. That's the worst part. It still is impressive at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I'm gonna do my closing thought just with like a result that came from this. So we started doing this thing, and I presented it on stage at a thing called Wicked Smart at the Driven Mastermind, and it was something that Manisha built. I didn't build it myself. It was using this framework. I took for granted at the time because we didn't have the framework really like locked in yet, just how much behind the scenes things she did. Because she's like, Jeff, it took me an hour to build this thing on the weekend. What she didn't tell me was that she had to do the business process, the feasibility analysis, the technical blueprint, and she had already done all that stuff. And then it only took her an hour to build.
It took her an hour to assemble the thing, right?
Exactly. It took her an hour to assemble it. So it's like, that's pretty cool. And it's amazing, but there's a lot of things that go behind that. It's like the tip of the iceberg. That's all I was seeing was the tip of the iceberg out of the water, not the thing below it. Not the Titanic killer. So it was really cool. We got second place, and we got a lot of people who are interested in this for us helping them automate. If we are going to start adding automation as a service, but we're not going to be doing automation where all we do is build. We're basically going to help plug you into the proven Lego blocks that we've put in place. We're going to be doing that stuff. Our builds are not going to take very much time, but we're going to charge for it. And the reason why is because it's going to save a ton of money. Not only that, but it's also going to be something where it's saving the trial and error of having to do these things on your own. And the building blocks are what took us the time. Yeah. So if we spend 20 hours on each Lego block, but it costs us an hour to assemble that for you, it's going to take you 100 hours to do these things. And that's really ultimately where we're going to be doing our automation services. We're not going to be doing bespoke automations. We're going to be doing ones that we use, things that are proven, things that we know make sense. And then we're going to be implementing them into other people's businesses, as opposed to creating something brand new from scratch for somebody, building out their processes. Because ultimately that is something that either you need to do internally or it's for like a different firm than us. But if anybody's interested in just having us help them automate the things that we've automated, the things that really just save them time and effort and tapping into what we're doing, we have that as a service. We also are giving several of these automations. They're going to be part of our ProfitSchool Pro program. So if you join ProfitSchool Pro, you will be able to have these things, plus both documentation, because we have all the paper to show you how to do it, plus how-to videos on how to use that thing inside of the program. So these results are great. Nobody's doing this, and we got, people are seeing it. We're showing it in front of 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, and they're like, yes, this is probably the best thing that I saw at this conference was that. And that was something that took an hour over the weekend because of all the homework that our team did in using this process.
Yeah, I love that. And going back, shout out for ProfitSchool, because you've got the free community there. You can still get some help on this stuff and kind of learn. And you also have ProfitSchool Pro, where you can get the templates and help get some customization on that as well. The other thing, just kind of sort of recap then, as I sort of take us home, is when you're thinking about automation, should you automate? Yes, of course. What should you automate? The simplest possible processes you can possibly come up with that take time. Like, don't automate something that takes you 15 seconds. It's not worth it. But take something that might take you 5 or 10 minutes. Sure, do that. Especially if you're doing it over and over and over again. If you take it once, not a big deal to automate. Why would you automate? You only do it once. But if it's something you do every 3 days, something like that, just get it off your plate. Because the automation, yes, it will take you time. It will be slower to build the automation than to just do the thing the first time. But after that, now you've just got this piece that just constantly is giving you back that 10 or 15 minutes that you had over and over and over again. You free up hundreds of hours of your future with automation. You hope you free up hundreds of hours of your team's future with automation. So now everybody can be a little bit stronger. Everybody can put a little bit more into the organization. Everybody has freed up their mental resources because they're not doing silly copy and pasting stuff when they've got automations to really help with that structure. So that would be my biggest advice when it comes to that, because it is a huge, huge pro to automate stuff, specifically those time savings. The con is trying to automate way too much, trying to automate before you have a process, trying to automate results, right? Trying to make it complicated and just not thinking through. It's such an obvious con. Like the reason that happens is because you don't take the time to plan it through. So take some time to think it through, business processes to go through, get help in ProfitSchool. You can drop your maps in there and just kind of say like, here's what I'm thinking. Am I missing stuff? Or I'm trying to automate this, but I'm not quite sure how to do that. That's where we help you out. So with that, we'll go ahead and bring this one to a close. Thanks again for joining us for this AI first edition of the ProfitSchool by Measure You podcast. Again, talk to a friend about this, share what you've learned, see what they're automating, because that's the other thing. Everybody's going to be automating. This is table stakes at this point. The old world is game over. It is now game on. So we've got to bring in that AI first automation mentality, and ProfitSchool is here to help you do that. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you on the next podcast. Talk to you soon.